If you want to understand exactly why your brain completely refuses to shut down at night, you probably shouldn't look at a clinical sleep study.
Right.
You should actually look at a 19th century French painting.
Which sounds, completely counterintuitive, like
Yeah.
looking to fine art to solve a modern neurobiological crisis.
Yeah.
But when you actually look closely at the mechanics of sleep, the overlap between visual aesthetics and human physiology becomes undeniable.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a really fascinating presentation designed by Dr. Christophe Delong and Kinexa Formation.
It's titled Jour 15, l'abandon musculaire, or Day 15, Muscular Abandonment.
Right, and this is part of a broader program they run called 15 Days with the Impressionists. We are focusing specifically on phase 3 of this program.
Which they categorize as regeneration and silence.
Yes, regeneration and silence. The mission here is to map out the body's complex physiological transition, from that high-stress waking state into deep restorative recovery.
Yeah.
And they use Impressionist art as the literal biological roadmap.
Yeah. The core scientific challenge Dr. Delong and Kinexa Formation are addressing is the transition between two competing nervous systems.
The sympathetic and the parasympathetic.
Exactly. You have the sympathetic nervous system, which drives that active fight-or-flight, high cognitive load state that we just inhabit all day long.
Sadly.
Right. And we have to mechanically shift dominance over to the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the architecture responsible for resting, digesting, and healing.
And this shift initiates what they call nocturnal neuroplasticity. Okay, so let's unpack this for a second. Nocturnal neuroplasticity is essentially this critical window where your brain takes all the motor skills, the procedural memories, everything you learned during the day, and it hardwires them into your long-term storage.
Yes, but the catch is the brain physically cannot execute this filing process if the body doesn't completely surrender its physical tension.
It's like you can't run a deep internal software update if the hardware is still vibrating with kinetic energy.
That's a great analogy. And this is where Kinexa's 4 dimensions of deep recovery provide such a useful framework. Rather than viewing sleep as just, a single event, they break it down into an interconnected cascade.
Right.
The first dimension is physiological. That's achieving a complete tonic discharge where your muscles just abandon their residual tension.
And that physical release is what unlocks the second dimension, right? The neurological phase.
Exactly. That's the consolidation of skills you just mentioned. And only when that neurological filing is underway can the body enter the third dimension.
Which is cellular recovery.
Right, where optimal physical regeneration occurs.
And then the fourth dimension being Kinexa itself, like the clinical measurement of how deeply you're sinking into those first 3 stages. So to really grasp how to architect this transition for yourself tonight, we first have to look at the finish line. We need to see what ultimate physiological rest actually looks like.
Which brings us to Auguste Renoir's painting, Le Sommeil, or The Sleep.
Right. Renoir's rendering of this state is just incredibly revealing from a biological standpoint. For those of you listening, picture this canvas. It is a portrait of a figure who is utterly consumed by sleep.
And because it's an Impressionist work, the technique itself tells the story.
Yeah, there are no harsh lines. There are no rigid confining boundaries holding the figure in space. The brushstrokes literally blur the edge of the body into the background.
Which, bringing back your technology analogy, it's almost identical to a device completely powering down to install that crucial update.
Right, you cannot have background applications running if you expect the update to integrate properly. The device has to surrender completely to the dark screen.
And what's fascinating here is that the visual aesthetic of Impressionism, that soft, borderless, almost melting quality, perfectly mirrors the biological reality of what Dr. Delong calls complete tonic discharge.
Because in a state of waking alertness, your muscles maintain a constant low-level contraction to fight gravity.
Yeah, just to maintain posture. But in deep recovery, the muscles abandon all voluntary contraction. You literally lose your rigid physical boundaries. You melt into the environment, much like the paint melts into the canvas.
The physiology of abandonment rendered visible. I love that. And Kinexa notes that this visual shift perfectly correlates with the biological shift necessary for that nocturnal neuroplasticity to lock in the day's skills.
Right, they track this clinically. When a patient reaches this level of tonic discharge, Kinexa's measurements show a distinct stabilization in heart rate variability.
Alongside a massive plummet in residual muscle tone.
Exactly. The transition into the deepest architectures of sleep becomes incredibly efficient at that point.
But achieving that state requires a deliberate deceleration. You don't just magically arrive there.
No, definitely not. The presentation outlines a daily protocol, a travail du jour, to facilitate this drop in tension.
And that involves progressive relaxation and utilizing a 4-6 breathing technique, right?
Yeah, inhaling for 4 seconds, exhaling for 6. Extending that exhale mechanically slows the heart rate. It provides a biological cue that the environment is safe enough to initiate that tonic discharge.
Because you can't just command your body to execute a total tonic discharge.
Yeah.
You can't snap from a high-stakes Tuesday afternoon meeting straight into the borderless surrender of Renoir's Le Sommeil.
Right, there has to be a mechanism to cross that gap.
The brain needs a dedicated transitional phase, which Kinexa formation illustrates using a second Renoir painting. This one's titled La Lecture, or Reading.
Yes, this piece introduces the concept of the mental bridge.
So in this painting, we observe a woman sitting quietly by a window, and she's entirely engrossed in a book. The presentation categorizes her state as attentive immobility.
Attentive immobility.
Now, I have to push back on this concept slightly.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, if the ultimate goal is shutting the brain down to achieve restorative silence, isn't reading still cognitive effort? I mean, you're decoding symbols, imagining scenarios, processing narrative. How does an active cognitive task actually help us wind down?
That is a completely logical question. The distinction here lies in which neural pathways are being engaged.
Okay.
During attentive immobility, the brain is indeed processing information, but it is doing so while intentionally starving the motor system of input.
Interesting.
When you are reading in a quiet, seated position, your global muscle tone drops to a minimal baseline. Your breathing inherently slows down.
Right.
Your focus narrows into a soft, sustained attention. That's completely unlike the fractured reactive focus demanded by answering rapid-fire emails or, navigating a crowded street.
So you're processing data without the anticipation of physical movement.
Exactly, which is the crucial trigger. This quiet, immobile focus acts as a primer for the default mode network, or the DMN. Ah, the DMN.
Yeah, it's essentially the brain's background processing architecture. It activates when our attention shifts away from external, goal-directed tasks.
So it's the system responsible for integrating the day's events, sifting through sensory input, and starting the early stages of consolidating procedural memory.
You got it. Reading acts as a cognitive warm-up for this system. It allows the DMN to boot up before you ever even close your eyes.
Okay, so the brain is actively shifting gears from data collection to data processing.
Yes. And from the clinical perspective, Kinexa analyzes this precise shift toward parasympathetic dominance as a massive indicator of the quality of the upcoming recovery.
Because if you attempt to bypass this mental bridge, like if you force a hard stop from intense task switching straight to a dark room, the default mode network hasn't been given the runway to start its filing process.
And the transition will be turbulent. You will likely experience that frustrating phenomenon of just lying awake while your brain violently cycles through the day's anxieties.
Ugh, we've all been there. Right. It's attempting to process information it should have integrated an hour earlier.
Which makes the practical application drawn from the lecture so vital. The daily work suggested here involves reading, but specifically light reading.
Yes, no psychological thrillers right before bed.
Exactly. A dense, anxiety-inducing thriller will flood the system with cortisol, completely defeating the purpose. It's about engaging the mind calmly in dim light, deliberately checking in with your body to consciously release physical tension while you sit.
It's a behavioral signal of safety.
Right. But quieting the mind is only half the equation, isn't it? The physical body is still carrying the kinetic residue of the day.
The muscles are still bracing for impact, yeah.
You have to physically communicate to your nervous system that the sensory day has concluded, which requires a completely different mechanism.
And this brings us to Edgar Degas.
Yes. Edgar Degas perfectly captured this specific biological mechanism in his painting, Femme se coiffant, or Woman Combing Her Hair.
It's such a beautiful piece.
It is. It's an incredibly intimate, quiet depiction of an evening ritual. The subject is slowly, methodically brushing her hair in a softly lit room. And here's where the synthesis of art and science gets really interesting.
Yeah.
According to Dr. Christophe Delong, this isn't merely a romanticized domestic scene. There is a rigid neurobiological foundation for why grooming behaviors feel so inherently relaxing.
It all comes down to the neurobiology of gentle repetition and haptic feedback.
Haptic feedback.
Yeah. When you engage in slow, circular gestures, whether that is brushing your hair, methodically washing your face, or applying lotion, You are directly stimulating the haptic receptors embedded in your skin.
And these receptors are highly sensitive to velocity and pressure, right?
Exactly. When they detect slow, rhythmic, soothing motion, they send a very specific signal up through the spinal cord.
It's basically acting as a biological brake pedal for global muscle tone.
Systemically, yes. It is a profound physical communication telling the body that the time for effort and defense has passed. This intimate, repetitive ritual actually stimulates the vagus nerve.
Oh, wow, the vagus nerve. That's a huge player.
It's the primary superhighway of the parasympathetic nervous system. It wanders from the brainstem down through the chest and abdomen, and when it's stimulated, it slows the heart rate, lowers blood pressure, and effectively commands the fight-or-flight architecture to just stand down.
It's an evolutionary hack. I mean, it explains the universal, almost hypnotic feeling of having someone wash your hair at a salon.
Or why the instinct to rock a distressed infant is so deeply ingrained in us.
We're leveraging the neurohaptic effect to artificially induce calm.
And Kinexa actually measures the clinical efficacy of this soothing micromotor activity. Through their metrics, they observe that engaging in these gentle, repetitive gestures yields a positive alteration in heart rate variability.
Which forces that crucial drop in residual tone.
Exactly, preparing the physical hardware for the total abandonment we examined in Renoir's Le Sommeil.
So the practical application for you tonight, drawing directly from Degas, is to consciously incorporate these slow, circular gestures into your evening routine.
Introduce some self-massage, methodically rubbing your temples or the back of your neck.
And pair it with that deep nasal breathing we talked about. It isn't just a spa ritual. You are building a physical, neurobiological boundary between the kinetic demands of the day and the restorative demands of the night.
But, there's one foundational piece of this architecture we haven't addressed yet.
Yeah.
You can attempt the mental bridge of reading, and you can engage in the physical wind down of haptic touch, but neither of those systems will fully engage if your environment is actively telling your brain it's midday.
The entire biological cascade is bottlenecked by the environment.
Exactly.
The brain has to receive external permission to initiate the cycle. Which brings us to the final piece of the Kinexa formation presentation.
Claude Monet's Coucher de Soleil à Lavacourt.
Sunset at Lavacourt, the ultimate environmental trigger.
It really is.
The painting is a masterclass in atmospheric light. It captures that progressive, inevitable drop in luminosity at dusk, shifting from these incredibly vibrant, burning orange reds down into deep, bruised purples.
And the presentation uses this painting to illustrate a brilliant concept, providing your visual cortex with a therapeutic sunset.
A therapeutic sunset, I love that phrasing. Even if you live in a dense urban grid and haven't seen the actual horizon in months, you have to simulate this specific outdoor light condition for your brain.
Because the necessity of this therapeutic sunset is anchored deep in our circadian biology.
Right.
Monet is rendering the ultimate signal for biological homeostasis. The human visual system and the brain's timing mechanisms, they evolved under the specific cycles of the sun.
So the warm wavelengths characteristic of a sunset, those specific orange, red, and amber hues, they have a direct physiological impact.
Yes, specifically on a tiny, powerful region in the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus.
The brain's master clock.
Exactly. When it detects the sharp, blue-toned light of midday, it suppresses sleep hormones to keep us vigilant.
But when it perceives the long, warm wavelengths of a sunset,
it dials down its activity, and that reduction in activity is the biochemical domino that initiates the secretion of melatonin.
And melatonin isn't just a sleep hormone, right? It is the chemical messenger that synchronizes the entire body, signaling to every cell that the dark phase of the circadian cycle has arrived.
So Monet's sunset is basically a visual representation of a chemical trigger. Looking at that spectrum of light is what physically unlocks the door to the rest of the process.
From a clinical standpoint, Kinexa uses this light perception as critical data. Reproducing this exact light spectrum, that deliberate shift from warm orange down to dark purple, is what physically launches the biological cascade.
It has a direct, measurable influence on the depth and quality of nocturnal recovery.
Because if your visual cortex does not receive the sunset signal, the subsequent mental calming and physical relaxation phases are severely compromised.
Your brain will just constantly fight the wind-down process.
Because environmentally, it still believes it needs to be hunting or gathering.
Exactly, which solidifies the final and perhaps most crucial piece of daily practice. You have to manufacture your own Lavacourt sunset.
In the hours before sleep, you must expose yourself exclusively to warm color tones. progressively eliminate overhead lighting, and drastically reduce the blue light emitted by screens.
Combine that environmental shift with the extended 4-6 exhale, and you give your brain the exact evolutionary cues it requires to power down.
It requires intentionally designing the sensory input of your environment rather than just passively existing in it until you collapse from exhaustion.
Exactly.
Okay, let's synthesize this entire roadmap because the framework Dr. Christophe Delong and Kinexa Formation have built here is just extraordinary. We explored the concepts individually, but the true power lies in the chronological sequence.
Right. You are meant to reverse engineer your evening.
Using these 4 Impressionist masterpieces as a sequential guide for your nervous system.
It provides a very clear, actionable trajectory from high alert to deep recovery.
So you initiate the sequence with the environmental trigger. You provide your visual cortex with a Monet sunset. You dim the environment, shift entirely to warm, amber tones, and signal the suprachiasmatic nucleus to start flooding the system with melatonin.
And with the environment set, you move into the physical wind down.
Channeling the quiet intimacy of Dia.
Yes, you engage the neurohaptic effect. You use slow, circular physical rituals, methodically washing your face or applying lotion to stimulate the vagus nerve.
Dropping your global muscle tone and pulling the brake on your sympathetic nervous system.
And with the body signaling safety, you transition the mind.
You embrace the attentive immobility of Renoir's reader. You sit quietly with a book in dim light. You starve the motor system of input while allowing the default mode network to boot up, gently processing the day's data without generating new stress.
And finally, because you have constructed these biological bridges, your system can safely achieve the ultimate goal.
The total muscular abandonment captured in Renoir's Le Sommeil.
The hardware powers down completely, the residual tension dissolves.
And in that state of profound physical surrender, your nocturnal neuroplasticity can finally take over. It hardwires every skill and memory you acquired that day deep into your cellular architecture.
It elevates the mundane act of going to bed into a highly calibrated art form of clinical recovery.
When you lay it out sequentially like this, it becomes glaringly obvious why so many people struggle with sleep and cognitive fatigue.
Oh, absolutely.
I want you to evaluate your own routine tonight. Look at how you transition from day to night. Are you abruptly slamming your laptop shut after firing off high-stress emails under bright fluorescent lights, throwing yourself into bed, and expecting your biology to instantly comply?
It just doesn't work that way.
No. Or are you taking the time to build these impressionist bridges for your nervous system? Are you actually giving your body the sequential signals it requires to truly surrender?
This contrast between a sequential biological wind down and our current technological habits, it raises a really important question.
It fundamentally reframes how we interact with our environment.
Because if deliberately contemplating the soft colors, the gentle rhythmic motion, and the unrigid forms of an impressionist aesthetic can measurably shift our nervous system into a state of deep clinical recovery, well, how much damage is the harsh, angular, high-contrast, blue light environment of our modern digital screens actively inflicting on our neuroplasticity?
Wow. We are trying to force a soft, deeply biological impressionist process using a harsh digital switch.
Right. Could we dramatically improve our brain's capacity to learn, to consolidate complex memory, and to physically regenerate simply by changing the fundamental aesthetics of what we look at and how we touch the world in the final hours of our day?
Are we biologically at war with our own devices?
Yeah.
It is absolutely something to think about the next time you find yourself scrolling through a bright, chaotic screen in the dark, wondering why sleep refuses to come.